And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, I'm really excited for our guest, who is an old friend, Linda Fisher Thornton. Linda is an innovative leadership development consultant with a passion for ethical leadership. I would actually go further and say she's probably one of the leaders in the field of ethical leadership. Her book, Seven Lenses, it's in its second printing, which is pretty cool. And it introduces a very practical seven lens model for seeing ethical complexity and 14 guiding principles for learning ethical leadership. Linda's a former bank senior vice president. We won't hold that against her. And she's now the CEO of Leading in Context. She's been in the leadership development space for over 25 years. She's on Inc.'s magazine of top 100 leadership speakers, and she works with folks across the spectrum of for and not for profit. She's also an adjunct professor at University of Richmond SPCS. So welcome aboard, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So, where do we start? You've written this book, which has become, I would argue, sort of the standard in ethical leadership. So, what was it like, sort of breaking into this sort of new space? Because you had your leadership development and academic career, and then this was sort of a passion project that was going for a while, and then you decided to dive in. So, what was that like?
It definitely was a new space in that the Seven Lenses provides a multidimensional perspective on ethical responsibility, where instead of just looking at character or sustainability or one or two pieces of it, it's a more holistic model. And so people didn't know there was such a thing available because there wasn't until the book came out. So I was basically delving into a new space where people didn't know there was something there, and they didn't know that they could use it. They didn't know they needed it. So it has taken some time for people to discover it. I would have to say the easy part was identifying the gap, seeing the need for something to be where this model ended up being. And the harder part was learning how to fill that space in ways that work. One of the initial issues was what I think about as answering the call to do this work and overcoming 100 reasons why it wouldn't be good for me to do it. No one else has been able to figure this out. No one else has defined ethical leadership in a way that people could agree to for, centuries. They've been
Sure.
arguing. Maybe it's impossible. I don't have the time. It'll be too expensive. It'll be too hard. It'll take too long. I'm already busy. And as fate would have it, we then entered into an economic downturn
Right.
where I had major clients and major projects. I was booked for the year, and then projects went on hold because companies were facing the economic downturn. And I also had been helping take care of my grandmother for 9 years. She passed away.
Yeah.
And there was just this realization, if I'm ever going to do something important with my life, okay, this is the time. This is the time to do it. The space had opened up with the economic downturn. And then
Sure.
I had imagined something that should go into this space. And then I basically had this outrageous goal of moving the field of ethical leadership forward and changing how we teach leaders about ethical responsibility and taking that conversation to a higher level of complexity. And so people thought I was crazy. I posted on Twitter, I'm on a mission to clarify what it means to lead ethically in a global society. And a leadership professor tweeted back, yeah, good luck with that. So
Well, sometimes, and I think you're an amazing example of true thought leadership, right? And what I mean by that is oftentimes people sort of just join the conversation, right? So if we were to take your book and sort of split it, there's a lot going on in the ethics world, and you could have gone there and added
right.
to the conversation, but it wouldn't have been as distinct. You could have moved over to the other side, leadership, where you've got a lot of experience and added some stuff there, but you decided to sort of create a new thing. And there's a cost to that in terms of before you can actually engage people, you have to create this level of awareness that this is a new thing and it's real,
Right.
right? And you're serious about it and you've done the homework on it and you're passionate about it. And it might be easier to sort of go one path or the other because others have sort of blazed the trail or worry. But you're clearly a leader in this space of ethical leadership. Let's talk for a little bit around, one of the things that I know from our work together is you really listen quite loudly to what the market wants. And you had some preconceived notions around the things that you want to do and don't want to do. I remember, I don't do keynotes, and I said, okay,
That's a great story to share
Yeah.
with other people, because I had to listen to what people really wanted and needed. And I had to let go of how I thought things should be, how I wanted them to be, in order to meet their needs and kind of step outside of myself. I didn't like the way sometimes keynote speakers would talk at groups. And I'm a trained facilitator. I would facilitate high level
Sure.
strategy and leadership development. And so I didn't really want to talk at groups. So in the beginning, I said, well, I just don't do keynotes. And then, of course, the first paying client that reached out to me after the book came out wanted a keynote.
Well, but I want to dig into the keynote issue. So it's not just that it's a personal preference. I like them or I don't like them.
Right,
But keynotes, people I think misunderstand what the expectation is from a keynote. So first
right,
of all, there's two masters that you have to serve. There's the participant who may be a volunteer or may not, right? They may have opted to go to that program,
right,
or they may have been voluntold, right? It's our company offsite and Linda is our speaker and sit
right.
there and be engaged, etc. But then there's also the person buying the speech, right? And
Yes,
I would argue that a keynote is not learning happens, but a keynote is not the optimal learning environment. It's very monologue, versus dialogue. It's designed more around, typically, not always, being somewhat entertaining and engaging, and it's less around getting people to understand and internalize things. And I think from a stylistic perspective, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that's probably why you weren't all keen on saying, yes, I will be a keynoter.
that's
Is that
exactly right. And so what I had to do was get over that thinking and move out of my own way and grow into it and put my own spin on it. So I love doing keynotes now, but they're not your typical
right?
traditional keynotes. I do incorporate dialogue, and there's a facilitation feel to my keynotes that's more engaging for groups, and it works for me and it works for my clients. But it took me some time to work through that and get to that point where I realized I can do this in a way that works for everybody
Yep.
and it's compelling and people gain great insights from it. It's worth doing. But I had to get out of my own way, sort of.
Sure. Well, and everyone meaning, everyone, I would say yourself included as part of that everyone, right?
Yep, right. It had to
Yeah.
work for me too, or I wasn't going
Yep.
to be invested in doing it. Yeah, so I had to reframe my thinking on that, and basically
Yeah.
this whole journey has been reinventing myself at a higher level of capability so that I can
Sure.
respond to what people need and want. You sort of like after a book comes out, it can somewhat take on a life of its own, and people want
Yep.
to interact with the content in certain ways that you don't expect. And so you have your plans and goals, but it doesn't always go exactly where you thought it was going to go. But it's usually better, but you have to let go of holding on so tightly to how you thought
Sure.
it should be.
And some of us that are more control oriented than other, that's an uncomfortable place to be. You've been incredibly resilient and consistent, right? So in terms of your social media presence and such,
Yeah,
could you share with us a couple of aha or breakthrough moments where the world told you or someone
yeah,
on social media told you something that either validated or put you in another direction or showed you other opportunities? Could you share some of those with us? Because I know
sure.
there's been many.
There's a lot of internal work that goes on to stay motivated to do this kind of work because it's so public. And I started out being a very private person who didn't really want to be on social media. And I have evolved into someone who absolutely loves being in that global conversation on social media. But that took some time, that evolution. But when people started reaching out to me and making comments on my blog,
Hmm.
and making social media comments and saying, hey, I read this piece that you wrote. What else have you written? I want to learn more. And when people ask really good questions after reading the book, and when they would submit unsolicited testimonials,
Sure.
recommend the book to other people, those are the moments that kind of keep you going when you're tired, you're exhausted. I've been raising children through this entire process, and helping family members, and volunteering, it's just there's a lot going on, and it's those little moments that help you're on the right path, it's making a difference for someone, and then you can you can keep doing it. At that point, you can keep your motivation going.
I love that. And the fact that you've been patient, probably an understatement, on social media and such.
Right,
Talk about, you mentioned it, I think it's an interesting point to touch on. Not that you were antisocial, but it just wasn't part of your repertoire.
right,
And then you said, well, let me check this thing out, but I'm maybe skeptical. I don't know if this is my cup of tea. And now you're quite engaged and you've built a lot of your following
right.
through consistently being there. What was that like? And how did you find a way to do it that was authentic and that you actually enjoy now?
Well, it was a wake up call because I said to my technology advisor at the University of Richmond, where I teach, I said, "Oh, I'll never go on Twitter." And she looked at me and said, "Wait a minute, aren't you blogging?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, that's how people are reading the blogs they follow. How are they going to find you?" And it was just this giant cosmic 2x4. Oh, okay. I got to get over it. And it was the hilarious thing. It was April Fool's Day. So I went back and I started a Twitter account on April Fool's Day. I thought, okay, this is going to be a joke, but I've got to do it. I'll figure it out. And I went through the stages that you go through in getting Twitter. And I have blogged about this where you start off saying, this is fluffy. This isn't going to do me any good. I just have to do it. Then you get in there and you start realizing, oh my gosh, people are talking about what I'm passionate about. And
Right.
they're releasing drafts of papers that aren't going to be published for 6 months. There's really cool
Yep.
research here that would move my work forward. So then I get sucked in and start engaging, and then then I'm hooked on it. I just love it because anyone can ask a question, anyone can interact with your content in meaningful ways, and I just love the dialogue now. But it took some time to
Yep.
get through that process. It's been 10 years now since I started blogging and writing my books.
Sure.
So that's definitely been a slow evolving journey, and to get on different social media platforms and feel comfortable in that space and to actually enjoy it.
Sure. So I want to go back to one thing that you said on social is there's a self-selecting sort of find my tribe and then be an active member of a community. Talk about the global perspective on that, right? Because you're able to reach folks that living in Richmond and being an academic and doing all the things that you do would never have crossed your radar without this.
Right. Well, right now, Seven Lenses has readers in at least 24 countries at my last count, and it's being recommended to students at prominent universities across geography, that people learning ethical leadership and CSR. And so I remember when I heard from a group of students at an international school in South America, and they wanted to do a Skype call because they were interested in learning more about the precautionary principle. And so
Right,
this
right.
one of the things that happens is you get all these opportunities that come out of nowhere, and you have to choose the ones that are meaningful and valuable, and the ones that are just
Sure.
shiny objects that are going to distract you. And this one, I thought this one was meaningful. So we had that conversation. They were very engaged. And I feel like they had some aha moments in our conversation. It was well worth doing. And so one of the first blog post comments that I got was from a reader in the UK. And I thought, okay, if people in other countries are noticing this, then it's worth doing. It's worth blogging because somebody's actually reading, somebody's actually reading this.
People often say with various strands of content, oh, is that going to translate well, not from a linguistic perspective, but from a cultural perspective, right?
Right,
Would they understand the concepts the way you've laid them out, in Brazil or in Singapore, or in the UK or whatever? And I think the world has shown you that you have a framework that is universal.
right. People from different religions and different
Yeah.
industries have found that it resonates with them. One of the things that's happened in recent years is with everything going on in the world right now, people are looking for a more meaningful way of understanding leadership than what, the
Yep.
little oversimplified messages they've been getting about ethics and leadership, kind of the do the
Sure.
right thing, use the highest integrity. Those are really important, but what the heck do they mean? People needed something more robust that they could use when they have to make difficult decisions. They needed to take their thinking to a higher level. So it resonated with them.
Well, and I think, people know when it's a black and white issue of right or wrong. I think what your book does a great job of getting people comfortable in the gray, which is where most of us live most of the
Right.
time as it relates to ethical. We know we shouldn't steal and we know we shouldn't lie. I mean, we know those things, right?
Right.
But it's the day-to-day stuff that we have to deal with as leaders. How do we do that through an ethical lens? So talk to us for a moment on, you went into this with some preconceived notions and some plans, like we all
Right.
do. These are the types of people do, etc. I've observed that you've done a really wonderful job of really, really listening and not having the ego so tied to the plan because it's your plan, right? So when people tell you, could you, would you, might you consider, give us a few of those examples, because I think there've been many actually.
I think you really do have to overcome the ego to do this work. And you start out being really invested in your own thinking, your own content, your
Yep.
own ways of doing things. I remember when the book was coming out and I had drawn the graphic of the 7 lenses and the 14 guiding
Hmm.
principles, and I really loved the way it looked, and the editor said, "Well, you're gonna have to change this because it's not round, and lenses are round, and, to be consistent, you have to change it." And for some
Oops.
reason, I got fixated on that I just didn't wanna let that go, but I, of course, had to because it had to be consistent with the whole message of the book. But it's funny how you can fixate on something and have trouble moving on. And so I've had to get better at really deeply listening and being willing to change and try new approaches and just say, okay, well, I thought that was great, but it didn't work. So let's move on, and it's one of the challenges of that is your work might be excellent, but it's never going to be enough for people to. That's one of the
Sure.
issues is, I'm working with this group. They're highly engaged. They're really excited.
Yeah.
We get to the end of this conversation and somebody says, "Hey, when's your next book coming out?" And
Oh no.
so you'll never be done. You'll never be able to do everything. And so you just have to keep stretching into it. And when the book came out, I was told that it was probably 5 or 10 years ahead of the curve in terms of
Right.
thinking. It was very future oriented and based on trends that were moving that direction. And that has turned out to be great advice. Basically, the person said, don't get discouraged
Sure.
if you notice it's taking a long time because you're where you were going to be, but you're ahead of that curve. And that has turned out to be true and very helpful because,
Sure.
when you have a slow process and you have to invest money up front that doesn't come back in the short run, you have
Right.
to have that long view and say, yes, I'm going to be patient. I'm going to just really adapt and learn and do the best I can. And of course, now I have a very popular 7 lenses workshop, but clients recently asked for a 3-part series for executives on ethical thinking and decision making. So I'm providing that format, and people are interacting with the content in all sorts of exciting ways. So the product line that offers evolving, not based on my creative control, but from people asking for what they want. And then,
But the market will tell you. The market ultimately will tell you how they want to consume your work. One of the things I'll add to what you said there is, being 5 to 10 years ahead at some level is flattering, but on another level is grueling.
exactly.
And I know that you got validation early on from other folks that are sort of leaders in their own fields of thought leadership, and others, which I would assume was somewhat encouraging. People that have sort of been through it before
Right.
in different domains. Is that
That helped offset the naysayers,
right?
the
Exactly.
people that thought that I was on a fool's errand because there was no way that I could untangle this mess and make it clear. And of course, that was very a difficult process, but I was able to
Sure.
accomplish it. But many people thought it wasn't possible to do it. And so that, keeping myself going, one of the things that I really enjoyed is that people want to hear the backstory, like we're talking about today.
Yep. Of course.
You've been working Harvard 10 years with many ups and downs. People, when they understand a little bit about your struggle, some of them have similar struggles, they can relate,
Sure.
and they feel more connected, they feel more included, more valued. And I didn't start out willing to be vulnerable and share my challenges. I
Right.
was an extremely private person,
Sure.
and but learning to be more.
But people are rooting for you. They like
Yeah.
you and they like your content, and it's nice that folks are rooting for you. I want to add one other thought, and then I've got a question before we start to wrap up. Is This book didn't come out a week ago or a year ago or 3 years ago. It's been out for several years. And I think it's a wonderful example of a, quote, sort of evergreen book. That when you write a certain book, which is your capstone of your thinking, of your thought leadership, of your methodology, it's not like, 6 or 7 years later, you rethought it. The seven lenses are actually 3.5 lenses and a bifocal, right? Like it's somewhat timeless. And I
Right,
think the ultimate litmus test of that is when I give that book to someone today, I get the same response as when I was giving it to folks 5 or 6 or 7 years
right.
ago, assuming it's a new person. And I think that's really important, that there isn't this, you don't get sucked into the publishing world's sort of seasonality of books. Oh, that's a spring release or a fall release. Could you just comment on that for a moment?
Yes, I have noticed that some people will write a book and it has maybe 3 to 5 really good ideas in it, and they're sprinkled over 12 chapters, and you have to read, so much to get to the meat of it. And then if
That could have been a TED talk,
yeah,
right?
and then whatever. And so what I went for was really putting a toolkit together for leaders on how to
Yeah,
learn this, how to apply it with case studies, with examples, so that they would have I was taking this more from a service perspective in terms of I'm filling a need, I'm doing a service for people. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's working and resonating with people now, is because they can tell that that's how it was created. My background is in human development and leadership development, and so how they learned it was the approach that I took. And so much of the other ethics information and training that you see out there was designed to be knowledgeable, right? To have the best
sure.
awareness content, but it wasn't designed to be meaningful and resonate with people at a higher level. And one of the things that I've loved is people have said, wow, this is really eye opening. I should have seen it, but I didn't see it. But now that I see it, it makes perfect sense to me. It's like, it's sort of that aha moment.
Well, which is why the lens model works, because once you've been exposed to it, you sort of can't unsee it, if that's the right
I
way
know
to
I
put it, right?
apologize to groups and I say, when you leave here, you will always be able to see the multiple dimensions of the ethical nuances of an issue. You can't undo that. Your thinking is taken to a higher level, and it stays at that higher level. And then they go on to influence their organizations, their groups, and their families, and begin to have this positive ripple effect that I was going for.
Right. Well, awesome. As we wind down now, just a quick question or two for you. So, out there today is someone in your shoes 5 or 10 years ago.
I,
Might be in a different space, might be different, probably is a different space, etc. What are the words of wisdom that you would share with them as they're about to embark on their journey as a thought leader, as an author?
I would say that managing your motivation and managing your stress are critical, because there will be times that you want to give up because it's too hard. I've had several of those moments myself. Maybe one of them was on the 14th manuscript revision of the book, after everybody said, "Oh yeah, this is great," but now we have to go through this process. And of course, 14, it took 14 because I was a perfectionist. I didn't want to have typos in the book, and so was the
Right, of course.
editor. But I had no idea how grueling that process was going to be, or that I was going to have to get up at 5:30 in the morning to write,
Right,
because
right.
I had a busy life. So you have to come up with good habits. I started doing Tai Chi every morning to
Wow.
focus, and it has really served me well. I had to manage my motivation, say, okay, once you get through that 14th manuscript revision, you get to do this fun thing. You have to really manage yourself to in a way to keep yourself going through the difficult times. And then those moments we talked about with people saying, oh, this is
Yep.
really helping me, those also keep you going. And then you get the lift that you need, but it does take time, and it's not going to happen overnight. And so it's going to be a
Right.
self discovery process.
If you're looking for get rich quick, there's probably better podcasts for you.
That's exactly
This
right.
certainly isn't that. Well, I appreciate all that you've shared with us today. I've been a longtime fan, and it's been my pleasure to have worked with you in the past and sort of be at the front or second row here watching the journey. And it's been an amazing one, and you've earned all of it. It's
Oh, thank
a lot of grit, a lot of hard work, and it's great stuff. I mean, people read it and they get exposed to it, and it sparks these wonderful, amazing, deep real conversations. And I think you should be really proud of what you've done.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your support along the way.
Thank you. Well, great to talk to you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.